Hello and welcome. My name's Bobby Thandi. I'm the founder and CEO of XR Games. We're a game development studio focusing on virtual reality and augmented reality. Since 2017, I've raised millions across numerous investment rounds, and today I'd like to talk about how to raise investment funding for your game studio. My presentation is going to be split across where do you start, what do you need to get ready before your investment, what to expect during the process, red and green flags regarding potential investors, and final comments as well. So where do you start? Well, I'm going to take you back to when I was a kid growing up in the 70s. We grew up in a poor household in Bradford, England. And when I was 13 years old, my parents somehow managed to buy me a Commodore Amiga Batman pack. But it didn't come with many games. So I learned how to make copies of those games and sell them to my friends, and use that money to buy more games. And if any lawyers are listening to this, I don't mean I made copies of games. I sold second-hand games to my friends. Before I knew it, I had hundreds of games, and it'd be my job to get a game, deconstruct what's fun about it, and then pitch those games to my friends, because I was getting access to some games that hadn't even come out and hadn't been promoted and weren't even in the magazines. And I found that fun, super fun activity to do. But growing up in Bradford and not having any connections to the games industry world, I assumed trying to get a job in the games industry was akin to becoming a footballer or a movie star or an astronaut. It's just simply a pipe dream, because I simply didn't have any connections to the legitimate games industry growing up in Bradford. So I thought that was the end of my career in the video games market as a young teenager. That's when my long detour started before I got back into the games industry. I studied BA Honours Business Studies at university, knowing I wanted to become an entrepreneur, but not really knowing how to do so. So after graduating, I went to work for WPP, which is a big market research, marketing, and ad agency. I wrote code to analyze big data, sold solutions to clients, and then also did client management. In short, I had three core skills: coding, sales, and client management. But I was coasting through life. That said, I now had a one-year-old daughter, and before going to celebrate her first birthday, I said out aloud to her, I want to give you the best life I can possibly afford. Right now, I'm not. I'm coasting through life, but from this day forward, I promise to give you the best, try my hardest at life and see where I can get to. Within 10 minutes of saying this, I got 2 text messages from 2 different friends, one offering me a job in banking and one offering me a job in the games industry doing business development for a game studio. Obviously, I jumped at that opportunity. Once my passion aligned with my work, I was living the dream. Success came with hard work. I won the first deal for Dubbit, the game studio I was working for, with a major film studio from Los Angeles, which was DreamWorks. And I told the executive producer at DreamWorks, I'm now going to hand you over to production now that I've won the project. And he says, no, you're not, Bobby. You're going to be the executive producer on the other side, and you're going to ensure the project's delivered on time, that it's delivered within budget, and that I remain happy throughout the process. I failed at all 3 objectives, but this kept happening more and more with more clients, and I started becoming able to deliver on those 3 objectives that they wanted me to deliver on. And within 5 years' time, EA came knocking, asking if I'd lead one of their studios. Instead of doing that, the owners of Dubbit helped set up my own game studio. And this is how XR Games was born. So where do you start when you aim to set up your own game studio? Well, for me, where I start is the Golden Triangle Foundation. This means you have at least 2 other friends to go on this venture with. One person takes care of all things business, one person takes all things creative, and the other person takes care of all things technical. And with the foundation of these 3 people, you can now begin to grow your studio. Unless, of course, you're an insanely talented lone developer who can handle creative, tech, and business. Now, what you're also going to need to do, unless you're very rich, is that you're going to need to raise dollars to fund your game studio. So where do you start? Whenever you start anything for the first time in life, you start with a blank piece of paper. This can be both scary, where do I start, and wonderful. This is the start of creating something amazing. Personally, I start with answering why. Why am I doing this? I imagine most of you have probably heard, bear with me. So there's a book called Start With Why, and I imagine most of you have probably heard of it. If not, I strongly recommend reading it, because in business, it doesn't matter what you do, it matters why you do it. And I once heard running a startup is like being repeatedly punched in the face, punctuated with intense highs on a daily basis. And to take the lows and to get back up from the being punched in your face, you need a very strong why. So what is your purpose, cause, or belief that will give you the energy, passion, and resilience to brush off defeats and rejections? I'll just do this slide again. So punctuated with intense highs on a daily basis. To take the lows and to get back from being punched in the face, you need a very strong why. So what's your purpose, cause, or belief that will give you the energy, passion, and resilience to brush off defeats and rejections? Because with your why, you can get knocked down 9 times and have the strength to get up 10. I'll now explain my why. One of my favourite games as a kid was Bubble Bobble. It was the first game that I completed with my mate Steve. Neither of us had ever finished a game before, and it was a euphoric moment to do so. And Bubble Bobble is a 2-player cooperative game, and nothing pleased me more than just managing to finish a level and turning to my friend Steve for a high-five celebration, or giving him a playful punch in the ribs if he messed up. Playing a game and sharing in the fun with a friend in real life was what made gaming so special to me. So much so that when I was the vice president of digital at Dubbit, the previous game studio that I worked on, we focused on making kids' games. And I went out and secured the Masher and the Bear IP, as my kids loved that animated TV series. And then I set about making a co-op game that would enable my kids to play together at the same time on the same tablet, as I wanted them to share in the love of co-op gaming just like I did. And even to this day, me and my kids, who are now 11 and 6, play this game as well. Also, it's been downloaded over 1 million times, which I'm very pleased with, as over 1 million households have got to enjoy cooperative gaming. So when I first tried VR, I found the technology that would enable people to play together digitally better than ever before, because you are now inside the game. And the sense of presence in the game enables you to do virtual high fives and share in the joy and pain of winning and losing. And that this would be possible regardless of where we were in the real life, especially as my friends are now scattered across the globe. So that's my why. I want to make games about playing together, and VR gives me the perfect platform for doing so. From that eureka moment, XI Games' mission statement was born. It's through play that people make some of their most meaningful and lasting memories, especially with friends and family. XI Games exists to make games that create those moments. This purpose, our why, is what drives us to excel in the games we make. And if we feel that we're not quite there in terms of making a game that will create lasting memories because they're so much fun to play, we'll go back to the drawing board. So I've banged on about why a lot. It's because I feel it's so important to get this right to help drive your company culture and help carry you through the hard times. So thinking back to the Golden Triangle Foundation, does it really need 3 people? Because that's what I did. But it's not your only option. Take Dante Buckley here, the good-looking fellow on the left, founder and CEO of Downpour Interactive. He has the skill set to do all aspects of the Golden Triangle Foundation all by himself. Back in 2015, Dante was inspired to make Onward due to the lack of tactical VR shooters in the market. He loved FPS, first-person shooter games on console, and wanted that for VR as soon as he saw the Oculus dev kit. So he set out how to learn to code by himself and to make a game by watching YouTube videos after dropping out of university. After a year of development, he was able to release the game on Steam Early Access in August 2016. It became a huge success, and he went on to grow his studio to 40 staff, bootstrapped, fully funded by himself, and become a bestseller on the Quest headset. And he did all this without external investment. He didn't have investors to answer to, nor a board to report to, like I did, and he did it his way. And then his studio was acquired by Meta last year when he was just 24 years old, so major props to him. In short, ensure you can cover off the Golden Triangle Foundation for your game studio, either by yourself or with your friends. So, what do you need to get ready before investment? If you've had any level of success in the games industry before, which will obviously come from years of hard work, then you should be able to use just an investor pitch deck to help raise investment. It'll be a hard and long road, and be prepared for a lot of rejections. but you should be able to raise the money. I found the best thing to do was to get an initial amount of investment from a close supporter and use that as a building block. For example, whilst I was VP Digital at Dubbit, I built up a great relationship with the board of directors, one of whom, Nigel Douthwaite, invested 100k into XR Games, the very first cash in. And this very first bit of cash gave me the confidence to go out and raise VC investment. Although I kissed a lot of frogs before getting my first VC check, the best lesson I learned was to always have a warm introduction to an investor. This instantly increased how positive the meeting felt. And if you can't secure a warm introduction with an investor, you'll have little chance of securing investment. So look for mutual connections with an investor on LinkedIn, or speak with a friend who has raised investment who can vouch for you to their investors. And if you don't have those things, you're going to have to start networking. Initially, I leveraged all the credentials that the team and I had, our history in the game sector, the games we'd made at our previous studios, the talks I'd given around the world, and how I'd been headhunted by EA to lead one of their studios, but instead chose to start XR Games. It's your credentials that merit a meeting with an investor, in addition to a warm intro and in addition to explaining your why. Equally important is your narrative for your pitch deck. What's your story? You need to tell a very convincing story that makes sense to the investor. As an example, I'll run you through part of my story for my investor pitch deck, and this upcoming section helps to convey the importance of the XR market. So every 15 years, there's a new tech center. We went from mainframes to PC to web to smartphones. So what's next? Well, with all the major tech companies are spending billions believing the next computing platform will be XR glasses, especially as they see this a primary route to enter the metaverse. The metaverse being a network of 3D virtual worlds focused on social connection, ideally accessed via VR, AR/XR headsets. As most of us know, in the book Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, the term metaverse was first used, and it outlines what this future could be like. Talking of which, Facebook have obviously pivoted their entire business to be focused on the metaverse, hence them being called just Meta. And Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, believes the next big thing will pervade our entire lives. Tim was actually quoted only just a couple of days ago as saying, "I think AR is a profound technology that will affect everything." And we are really going to be looking back and thinking about how we once lived without AR. So a side note is what I'm trying to get across to the investors is that the future of XR is going to be a big deal. Personally, I think even within 15 years, we'll be playing all video games through the use of XR glasses. The XR market is focused to grow at 62% compound annual growth rate to reach $464 billion by 2026. This incredible growth will motivate major console and tech firms to make a push for VR gaming studios through mergers and acquisitions to strengthen their share of the overall market. I mean, it's already happening. My friends at CoachSync were bought by Thunderful for $85 million, and Vertigo Games were bought by the Embracer Group for $115 million. Also, Meta have bought many VR studios, including the makers of Beat Saber and Onward. So a side note, it's best to show investors how big your market is forecasted to be. And looking back at the history of deals for example, Facebook online games or mobile gaming studios, this table shows us something very interesting. When a new medium emerges, large studios don't put their best 100, 200, 300 staff on this new medium. The return on investment simply isn't there to make a profit. This is known as innovator's dilemma, a phrase coined by Clayton Christensen in his book by the same name. So this leaves ample room for startups to innovate. And when the market gains traction, large companies simply acquire the best performing startups to bring those skills in-house. They're the yellow highlighted rows here. But if you look at the white rows, those are the studios that waited until the new medium gained mass market adoption. And look at how much more expensive those acquisitions were. They have a B at the end of their exit price. So as a side note, by referencing history and showing data points from the past, investors will easily be able to project the same thing happening in the XR market. And it's already happening, and therefore it's easier to understand why placing a bet on XR games makes sense. Fingers crossed. Further, according to a Morning Brew Harris survey, US consumers would prefer to purchase XR hardware from Apple versus Meta by a multiple of 6. This allows us to project that when Apple's XR headset launches, it will significantly grow the overall XR market. So a side note, show investors where significant growth can come from. This shows investors that time is of the essence and they really need to get in now before it takes off. There's significant and increasing levels of global investment into XR verticals. Previously, we had a lot of hype regarding VR in 2014, but investors got their fingers burned, expecting mass market adoption imminently. They invested too much too soon. But there wasn't enough VR players to purchase the content, and therefore the return on investment simply wasn't there to be had. That said, from 2015 onwards, we can see increasing levels of investment. So all the data points now indicate we're at the slope of enlightenment on the Gartner hype cycle. That's now. But my gosh, when I was raising money in 2017 and 2018, I didn't have the benefit of the slope of enlightenment. I was very much in a trough of disillusionment, which made it very hard to raise investment. And every time a new medium emerges, the revenue and market size starts small, and then it starts to grow. Look at console in green, PC in light blue, and mobile in red. All three have grown the overall market for games. And although VR in pink is still relatively small, I genuinely believe, along with Meta, Apple, Sony, and other tech firms, that XR will become the next computing platform. And it's for this reason I firmly believe in the future of XR. And it'll be those XR gaming studios who have been honing their craft for years that will be able to start reaping the rewards when the market really takes off. So a side note, show you understand the wider market and how it'll grow by referencing the past. So the $64,000 question, when will XR go mainstream? Personally, I think it'll be in the next 4 years, so by 2026. The above are my market assumptions of pivotal moments in the XR market. I wrote this a couple of years ago. So obviously a bit of it isn't quite correct. Such as the increased adoption of the Quest headset, the key headset at the moment, which has sold about 17 million units. PlayStation's upcoming PSVR 2 headset, which is due out late Q1 next year. And the upcoming Apple headset, which will significantly help grow the overall market. So what you're trying to do is show investors that you understand what needs to happen for mass market adoption to take place. Hopefully, these few slides on what's the story help showcase how you could do it. And if you haven't previously had success in the games industry, you can still raise investment. Obviously, you'll need a pitch deck, but if you can provide your investor with a playable demo which showcases the fun in your game, it will significantly increase your chances of securing investment. And don't get me wrong, you'll still need to kiss a lot of frogs, and getting from a demo to a shipped game is not easy. But also remember that don't expect investors to be falling over themselves to invest, even though you've made a really fun playable demo. In short, when raising investment for your studio, you're hoping to raise enough money to make a slate of games. But while you're trying to do this, you can also pitch your demo to publishers for funding as per the traditional games industry route. But I personally found the amount of effort it takes to pitch your game or your demo to a publisher is the exact same effort it takes to pitch to an investor. But the benefit of going to an investor is that you'll raise enough money for a slate of games. So once you've done it once, at least you can go away and start making a bunch of games rather than having to constantly go back to publishers and pitch to them each time you've got a demo. And the best thing I found, whereby I'm not having to chase investors and investors are chasing me, is to release successful games. For example, our Angry Birds Under Pressure VR game, which was shipped on time, on budget, and to critical acclaim, made it easier to raise investment in 2019 versus 2017. Whereas Zombieland VR, a game we made with our great partners at Sony Pictures VR, this game not only shipped on time and on budget and won a bunch of awards, it was also a commercial hit, which has resulted in even more investors chasing me now. My point is that you'll be likely raising multiple funding rounds, and securing your first institutional investor will be the hardest raise you do, but subsequent fundraising should be easier, especially when you've made and delivered a hit game. So, you raise a small amount of money from friends and family, Use that as a building block to raise a bigger amount of investment with your pitch deck, which includes your why, your story, and your credentials, and then trust your Golden Triangle Foundation to deliver a good game. And once you get there, you'll have a solid foundation from where you can really scale your game studio. Quick side note, if you're fortunate enough to have a lot of investor interest, I'd start looking into the investors' values. What are their values? Do they align with your own company values? Can these values be evidence? Choosing an investor is like choosing a life partner. You're going to be in it for the long haul, so choose wisely. So, what to expect during the process? During my first fundraise, for every 50 investors I tried to speak with, I was rejected by 49, and that's not a nice experience. So see it as working your way through a sales funnel. 50 investors at the top should result in you being able to speak with about 40 via solid warm introductions. Of those 40, at least 15 should request a follow-up meeting, of which about 6 will take it very seriously, and 3 will write an investment memorandum to submit to their investment committee, of which 1 should hopefully give you the money. When you get to the stage of having follow-up meetings with a potential investor, you really want them to start talking about pulling together an IM, which is an investment memorandum. This is a document that investors need to write to convince their own IC, which is their investment committee, basically the people who make the decisions at the investment firm, that they should invest in your studio. An IC are the most senior folks in the investment firm who get to decide which investments to make. If the IC meeting goes well, you'll be looking at more due diligence, and then hopefully a term sheet will be received. A term sheet is a heads of terms document regarding the key points of the investment, the amount, the percentage of equity required, good and bad leaver clauses, etc. And then you can start work on the final 2 key documents, the shareholders agreement and the articles of association. This is based in the UK, but I think it works globally as well. There's also a whole bunch of documents you'll need to provide in final due diligence, but they're all relatively straightforward. It's a full-time gig raising investment, and it'll take probably up to about 6 months of your time. And although being rejected sucks, you will receive lots of useful feedback each time you pitch to an investor that you can use to iterate your pitch deck. As you begin to explore investment opportunities and options, you might get tempted to work with an introducer, someone who will help write your pitch deck, introduce you to investors, and charge you a fee for doing so. Personally, I did not do this, but obviously each scenario is different, and I'd recommend speaking with an advisor who can help you navigate what's best for you. For me, they wanted to be paid up front, money I didn't have early on, and they wanted to know all the investors that I'd spoken to already, with a side benefit being that their network increases. But they wouldn't tell me the investors that they knew. Further, after you spend weeks and weeks, personally, I think when you're crafting your pitch deck, you can put your blood, sweat, and tears into that pitch deck and spend weeks and weeks working on it and refining it. Whereas I found that the introducers would kind of do a quick first pass and it wouldn't be quite as good as what you could do. And even though I got rejected by a lot of the investors up front, I built that connection. And as more press came out about XR Games doing better and better, these investors actually reached back out to me. So I find it super useful to kind of expand your own network of investors. And I really wish I had a corporate advisor when I started raising my very first investment funding, as I find that they are super value. They see deals all day, every day, and just like investors, but they're on your side of the table, and they help bring alignment to all the different stakeholders. What I mean by this is that you should treat an investor as someone on the other side of the table. They want to get the best deal that they can for themselves and not you. But once the deal does go through, you'll find that the investor is now on your side of the table and they'll want to do nothing but support you. And if you're raising money again, the investor will be on the other side of the table until the negotiations are complete. But basically, having a corporate advisor always on your side will help advise when things are misaligned and give you the advice you need to hear. Also, I highly recommend hiring the best lawyer that you can afford. You're going to be going toe-to-toe with the investors' lawyers, who will be adding all sorts of clauses into the term sheet, the shareholders' agreement, and articles of association. So you need someone equally savvy to point out what's fair and what isn't. And you'll be pleased to hear all the legal fees can cost up to about 50,000 British pounds to get a deal done. You shouldn't have to pay anything until the deal is complete and the investment funds are in your company bank account. Also, expect lots of questions from the investors during the process. So many questions. And if you're fortunate enough to receive a signed term sheet, you'll be entering full due diligence. This is when the investors want to turn every stone in your company's history. My advice here is not to try and hide any skeletons in the closet. They will come out. So always be open and transparent about everything when you're in due diligence. As per any relationship in life, if you break the trust, you're screwed and the deal will fall through. So, red and green flags during potential investors. It sounds daft, but do your homework. Ensure that they have the money. I've wasted time talking to investors who actually didn't have any money. They were trying to raise funds themselves and wanted to state to their potential investors that they had exciting startups to invest in. Absolute madness. So do your own due diligence. Speak with other startups connected with the investor or any mutual LinkedIn connections that you may have. Also, find out the size of their fund. There's no point taking on investment if they can't follow on their money. This doesn't apply to angel investors, but for the bigger check sizes, ensure that they have follow-on money. This will make it easier to raise more money from the same investor in the future. So, for example, my most recent investment round a couple of months ago, it was all my existing investors that followed on, so that made things a lot simpler. Also, listen to your gut. Is it telling you that this person is a dickhead? If so, move on, no matter how much you need the money. Network. How can the investor elevate your business through their contacts? As part of the getting to know you phase, they should be introducing you to folks within their network. Perhaps you get to meet folks who can grow your studio or provide you with a much needed contact at a company that you're trying to do business with. Are they founder friendly? Investors who have been entrepreneurs themselves in the past really stand out here. They know how brutal your journey can be regarding the highs and the lows. And they want to equip you to shoot for the stars. As such, they might enable you to take some cash off the table to alleviate concerns regarding your mortgage. That said, you'll be giving up equity that should be worth a lot more in the future. So it's up to you as what you do. Also, speak with multiple portfolio founders of this investor. What do they say about your investor? And are they really founder friendly? The investor will probably give you a list of portfolio founders to speak with, but definitely go on their website and speak to the portfolio founders that they didn't introduce you to. How can they prove that they've got your back? This can be evidenced in numerous ways. For example, they set aside 10% of the equity pool or create 10% equity for growth shares. And they want you and your entire team to participate. So the investor is diluting themselves to create this equity, as they know it's you and your team that will drive all the value in your business. Growth shares will be on top of your equity as an extra cherry in the cake. After all, if you drive an exit which is 10, 50 or 100 million more than expected, you and your team should be rewarded for the extra upside. Just note how fast or slow they are to respond to your calls, emails, texts, etc. The faster, the better. Some Silicon Valley VCs can get a term sheet out in 8 days from the first meeting. I've not met or heard of any UK investors who can do the same, but the point is, ask how long things take, and then ask the portfolio founders how long they actually took. Trust. An example might be an introduction to a possible chairperson or to an advisor or a non-executive director. This really stood out to me. The deal might not happen, but they're open to sharing their network, and it at least lets you walk away with a really valuable contact if they don't proceed with an investment. No, obviously this is a two-way street, and the said person will be feeding back to the potential investor on whether or not you're investable. Sector expertise may or may not be something that you want. If it's just money, they could leave you to run your studio as you see best and support you along the way. That said, a sector specialist investor could help elevate your business by creating a network of game studio CEOs for you, which can be leaned on for you to help solve hard problems. Reading between the lines. You'll know this when you see it. Watch for investors who can piece together truths from what you've not said. It really does separate the super smart investors from just the smart ones. So final comments. After a hit, you'll have crazy levels of new inbound opportunities. Investors will be chasing you, acquirers will be chasing you. New potential clients will want to work with you. We went from 20 staff working on one project in January last year to now having almost 100 staff and working on 6 projects concurrently. To help you do this, I implore you to clearly set out your values. With a strong set of values, you can ensure all future hires are held accountable to them. And what are potential employees' values? Do they align with your own company values? Can these values be evidenced? Take fun, for example. If you're not having fun at work, you're not going to be making a fun game, methinks. So is this person fun to be with? These values reflect your culture, and maintaining the integrity of your culture is absolutely paramount. Never let anyone ruin your culture, meaning sometimes you will have to make ruthless decisions if you think someone's not working out. This also works for choosing an investor. It's a bit like choosing a life partner. So, you're in it for the long haul, so choose wisely, as I said earlier on. And it's just been over 10 years since I made the promise to my daughter to give her the best life I can afford. And while I've achieved that in terms of food, clothes, house, holidays, and school, please note that success does come with major sacrifices. I'm not making all her school activities. I'm working 3 hours each day on holiday when I'm with her. And that's when we find the time to go. And I'm not being there for bedtime through the week for at least 2 or 3 nights because you're working late. So just be mindful what you're seeking to achieve. On the plus side, though, players that play your games will leave amazing reviews. When your work is validated by players, that's a wonderful feeling. You'll be working with your mates as a team to deliver hit games by overcoming major obstacles. That's a wonderful feeling. And you'll be making games for a living. Making games and getting paid to do that, that's a wonderful feeling too. We've grown to almost 100 people now, meaning I'm responsible for 100 people's household incomes. That is a heavy responsibility, which comes with sacrifices that I've outlined earlier, and it will result in you having to work crazy hours if you're the CEO or the founder. But if you're looking for a 9-to-5 gig, then growing a successful game studio might not be for you. But I deeply care about all my staff, and I do my best to ensure that they have a good work-life balance. And someone said, being an entrepreneur, is that you have to be wired in a certain way to be able to handle the highs and lows of running a business. If that's you, do it. But if you prefer a work-life balance, that's cool too. In which case, I simply join a successful game studio as an employee rather than lead it, which would mean you're not going to have to make the sacrifices that I'm making along the way. In short, trust the process, be persistent, I should say, have self-belief, and good luck. And I'd just like to finish on this. One of my biggest investors is Adam Schoff. He's the CEO and founder of Act Media Ventures, based in Melbourne. So if you are looking for funding, please hit him up and say Bobby introduced you to him over LinkedIn, or mentioned you could get in contact with him over LinkedIn. Thank you. And if you'd like to get in touch, please feel free to do so, whether that's email, Twitter, or on Instagram. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Look, to the extent you're comfortable sharing it, I'd just be interested in how you thought about the value of your studio across funding rounds.
Good question. The best way to do that is to look at TechCrunch. There's some brilliant databases out there that show you all the different funding valuations and at the different stages as well. So I'd be pulling all the data on all the different VR studios and seeing when they were at 3 people, 5 people, 10, 15, 20, etc., what investment did they raise and what valuation did they go for? And then kind of just hedge your bets in terms of where you think your studio fits in with the wider context. But basically, you need to validate it through data points, and those data points are fortunately out there based on the amount of information in the public.
Yeah, so it is predominantly on a scale basis that you were kind of comparing the studios?
Correct. So, headcount's one way, revenue's another way, your pipeline's a different way, the contracts you've got. Basically, the more revenue you're making, the higher the valuation. The stronger the contracts, whether they're 2-year contracts, 3-year contracts, the better. If you have long-term relationships with the movie studios who are going to give you a constant pipeline of work, that helps. Essentially, it's just kind of building up a narrative and being able to kind of walk an investor through as to how you've arrived at your figure. At the beginning, I'd try and pull a figure out of the air, but you kind of get challenged on that, so to speak. So then I kind of went away and did all the homework to kind of validate why I believe we're worth this much. Hi.
Hi. What would your advice be other than networking for students who are about to graduate and wanting to meet their own studio?
Cool. So as a student, if you don't mind it, you can approach any game studio and kind of work for free or whatever they're willing to give you to build up that experience and go to kind of network events like here and, just keep networking to meet investors, meet people in the industry, get experience, gain some knowledge. But investors, fortunately, like in the UK, there's events such as there's PACs, and with PACs there are also investor opportunities to meet investors where you can kind of pitch your game studio, pitch your demo, pitch your ideas. So it's just being able to go out there to conferences where you'll meet a whole range of investors and kind of pitch your opportunity there. So if you don't have warm introductions to investors, get out there, start networking, start building up your connections, basically.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
What would you characterize the right time to approach investors? Like, I guess in my business experience, I've always found it, if you wait until you feel prepared, you're actually too late. Do you sort of have any, check boxes that you like to have in order before you start approaching people?
Sure. It's whenever you think you've done the work that needs to be done to approach the investor. So, for example, my pitch deck, I'd be working on it for weeks and weeks and weeks until I felt that it was good enough to present it to an investor. And then you do that, and then you get a whole bunch of feedback, and you start iterating on the pitch deck again. If I have a demo, it's a case of, I'm playing it with my friends. Do we think it's fun? Are we smiling when we play it? And when you allow your friends and family to play the demo, do they think it's fun? Only when you've kind of validated either the work's good or the demo is fun, only then would I go and then pitch it and present it to investors or platform owners or publishers. But you'll know yourself whether or not it needs more work or more improvement. But definitely practice with friends and family until you think it's good enough to take it out to investors.
You mentioned earlier in your talk about Onward and how they managed to fund the projects and their studio themselves.
Yes.
I was curious, you also said that was the best case scenario if you're able to do so. There are advantages to getting investment, and I was curious at what point you think is that tipping point between getting investment, and I was curious about what advantages investment offers over self-funding.
Cool.
When you should decide to take the investment versus funding.
Yeah. So, my friend Dante's, in my opinion, one of the ultimate indie poster boy success stories in terms of what he's achieved and what he's done. He was able to, spend a year making the game at home by himself because basically he dropped out university. So the money that he was going to spend being a student at university, he simply just stayed at home and worked away for a whole year. And when the game launched, the revenues that got generated, he was able to hire one member of staff, then another member of staff, and keep growing. So, he didn't need to raise investment funding to fund his game studio. He was also fully remote, and so it didn't have the cost and the overheads of a studio as such. So it depends on the journey you wish to go on. If you want to kind of scale your studio quick and fast to kind of take advantage of a certain opportunity, you're going to need to raise investment funding because you're going to have a studio, you're going to have overheads and costs to fund, and you're going to, especially if you need to build out a team, you're going to need that revenue. But if you can generate the revenue from game sales or perhaps taking on work for hire work, it means you're going to be less reliant on investment funding. But if you go down the work for hire route, then you're distracted on servicing your client. So if that means you're not making the game that you want to be making as well. So it kind of depends on which route you want to go down and how fast you want to get to where you need to be.
Thank you.
Cool. You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering how the landscape for investment in games and XR differs in Australia compared to overseas.
Good question. So my first VC investment was actually from Melbourne, Adam Schaff. But I found there's still equally the same appetite in the UK and the US. So in my opinion, there's been no difference between Australia, UK, US. And thank you to Australia for being the first investment into XR Games as a VC investment. So yeah, not noticed a difference myself. Hi.
Hi again. What is your views between like private investors as well as crowdfunding?
I've personally not gone down the crowdfunding route. I mean, don't take this as official advice, but what I've heard from friends is, say they're going on Kickstarter and they need to raise, make up a number, 500K, that they had already pledged from other investors or friends and family that they would put in like 250K. So as soon as the Kickstarter went live, that you'd see all this money coming in, but that money that was coming in was kind of money that they'd kind of raised kind of off the books, and that money would just get funneled through Kickstarter. And because Kickstarter see all this money coming through, that meant it was better promoted and advertised on their platform to hopefully get the rest of the money. But it feels far too risky, in my opinion, to do that. At least with raising funding from an investor, there's a process that I could go through, and I kind of knew if I spoke to enough investors, I'll eventually get to the one who'd give us the money. But don't take my word for it and do your own research. Thank you. Hi.
Thanks so much for the talk. This is super informative.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question. So when looking for investors, or at least, when talking to investors or networking and things like that, what if they're not very savvy to the games industry? For example, we've had a couple of contracts here and there, and as you said in the part with like hiring a lawyer to look over the terms of agreement and things, there's not even like a games lawyer really either that can kind of help us get what we need. So I guess my question is like, what do you do when the pool is so limited of people who have games knowledge that you need to then talk to, like lawyers and investors?
Sure. What I found when investors were not savvy to the games industry or the VR market, and I was spending time educating them on what the VR market is and the XR market and where it could go and grow, or the games industry market themselves, I was like, this isn't the best use of my time. So I started focusing on only savvy investors who understood the market and believed in VR, because then it just ticked off so many boxes that I didn't have to try and bring them along the journey. But there are many lists out there on the internet of of investors who focus on the games market. And by speaking to those guys, it's just light and day difference than someone who's not savvy. So I try and focus only on investors who have made investment into game studios. Because what you'll find in those instances, they understand that they need to be patient, and it might not be your first, third, fifth, or 10th game, and it might be the 11th one that becomes a success. Because they've been through that journey before, they understand what it is that you'll be going through. Whereas an investor who's not savvy, they'll probably expect the first game to be a hit, and if it's not, there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations there, that's for sure. You're welcome.
Sometimes investors will be interested in putting money into get equity in a company.
Yes.
Sometimes there can be equity in a product. Have you got any experience with negotiating between those two, and is one favorable over the other?
For sure. So the games that XR Games make are based on world-famous IP, intellectual property. So I put up two examples up there. One was Angry Birds, whereby Sony Pictures made the movie Angry Birds 2, and it was also obviously owned by Rovio. And then Zombieland, which is owned by Sony Pictures as well. The reason for that is I thought by partnering up with world-famous IP, XR Games can become well-known and successful off the back of that IP, which is kind of proving itself out, which meant any investor who had that idea of taking kind of ownership or equity in the game itself, it simply wasn't possible due to the deal that I had done with Sony Pictures. So that meant investors could only take equity in my game studio, which made things a lot more simpler. That said, on the flip side, if I could have allowed investors to take ownership of the kind of product and the game itself, it would mean that I wasn't diluted and I'd have more equity. So they both got their pros and cons for sure, if that answers your question at all. Cool. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to ask about how you approach investors' exit strategies, I think, and is that something that you consider like initially when you start talking to someone, like a private investor?
Good question. So within the last 13 months, I probably had 6 acquisition offers. And when I first set it out, if I'd been offered the numbers that were coming through right now, I thought I would have jumped at the opportunity. But the market's growing significantly, and I still passionately believe in XR glasses becoming the future of all gaming. And, you know, I'm 100% in it for the long term now and don't wish to cash out or sell. But if you bring on investors, they do need to cash out and make a return on their investment. But fortunately, within the investment world, you know, friends and family, angels, VC investors, then you have something what we call private equity. And private equity investors write much bigger checks where they'll essentially come in, take out all the current investors who wish to take cash out now, and then you kind of go to the next tier, and there's even larger private equity firms within there. Then you could even go and stock market and float, and then potentially do a trade sale. So it kind of, when you take on investment, you know, do acknowledge that they will want a return, a multiple on their money. You're going to have to deliver that. And a great example of that kind of journey I just mentioned there is Sumo Digital, based in, headquartered in Sheffield. I think they're like 1,500 staff. And, you know, they did private equity, floated, and then did the trade sale to Tencent for like 1.3 billion. So there's multiple ways in which investors can get money off the table. I've been told we need to wrap up now. But thank you so much. Cheers, guys. Thank you.